The Vikings, fierce warriors, fearless explorers, and masters of war. From the cold shores of Scandinavia, they launched campaigns of conquest, raiding, and expansion that shook the medieval world. Today, we count down the top 10 most epic Viking wars, battles that defined an era of blood and glory. Stay until the end to discover the most legendary Viking war of all time. Don't forget to give a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more incredible videos. Number 10. The Siege of Paris, 845 AD. The Siege of Paris, 845 AD, was one of the most infamous Viking raids in history, led by the legendary warrior Ragnar Lothbrok. Commanding a fleet of about 120 Viking longships, Ragnar and his warriors sailed up the Seine River, striking fear into the heart of the Frankish kingdom. The city of Paris, poorly defended and unprepared for such an attack, faced brutal pillaging as the Vikings overwhelmed its defenses. The Frankish king, Charles the Bald, had little choice but to negotiate, offering an enormous ransom of 7,000 pounds of silver to make the invaders leave. This siege marked a turning point in European history, proving that even mighty kingdoms were vulnerable to Viking aggression. Though the Vikings withdrew after receiving their ransom, the attack exposed the weakness of the Frankish defenses and inspired further Viking incursions into France. Over the next decades, Viking raids became a recurring nightmare for the region, eventually leading to the foundation of Normandy, a Viking settlement that would later shape European history. The Siege of Paris remains one of the most daring and successful Viking raids of all time. Number 9. The Battle of Maldon, 991 AD. The Battle of Maldon, 991 AD, was a legendary clash between the Vikings and Anglo-Saxons, showcasing both the brutality and honor of medieval warfare. A fleet of Viking raiders, led by the Danish warlord Olaf Tryggvason, landed on the shores of Essex, demanding tribute from the Anglo-Saxon defenders. The local leader, Ealdorman Byrhtnoth, instead chose to fight, displaying a sense of warrior pride that would become immortalized in an Old English poem. However, in a moment of fatal chivalry, Byrhtnoth allowed the Vikings to cross a narrow causeway to engage in fair combat, giving them the advantage. The battle ended in a devastating defeat for the Anglo-Saxons, with Byrhtnoth slain and his forces scattered. The Vikings looted the region and eventually forced King Athelred the Unready to pay the first Danegeld, a tribute meant to buy peace but ultimately encouraging further invasions. The battle is remembered not just for its military significance, but for the way it shaped English resistance to Viking incursions, inspiring later leaders like King Alfred the Great to develop stronger defenses against Norse aggression. Number 8. The Invasion of Ireland, 795–1014 AD. The Viking invasion of Ireland, 795–1014 AD, marked over 2 centuries of raids, settlements, and fierce battles that reshaped the Emerald Isle. Beginning in 795 AD, Norse warriors launched devastating coastal raids on monasteries such as Lindisfarne and Iona, seeking gold, silver, and slaves. Over time, these raids evolved into full-scale invasions, with Vikings establishing permanent strongholds, including Dublin, Waterford, and Limerick. These Norse settlements became centers of trade and power, integrating Viking culture with the Irish way of life. However, their presence also led to constant warfare with Irish kings, as local rulers resisted Norse dominance. The conflict reached its climax in 1014 AD at the legendary Battle of Clontarf, where High King Brian Boru led a coalition of Irish forces against a Viking alliance. The battle was a bloody and decisive clash, ending in an Irish victory, but at a heavy cost. Brian Boru was slain in the chaos. While the battle didn't end Viking influence in Ireland entirely, it marked the decline of Norse power on the island. The Viking settlements gradually assimilated into Irish society, leaving behind a legacy that still echoes in Irish culture and history today. Number 7. The Battle of Edington, 878 AD. The Battle of Edington, 878 AD, was a defining moment in the Viking Wars, where the fate of England hung in the balance. The Great Heathen Army, led by the Viking warlord Guthrum, had ravaged Anglo-Saxon lands for years, forcing King Alfred the Great into hiding. From the marshlands of Athelney, Alfred regrouped his forces, training his warriors for a decisive confrontation. When the Vikings advanced into Wessex, Alfred emerged, leading his army against them in a ferocious battle at Edington. The battle was an overwhelming Saxon victory, breaking Viking momentum in England. After days of fierce fighting, Guthrum's army was surrounded and starved into submission. The Viking leader was forced to surrender and agree to the Treaty of Wedmore, which resulted in his conversion to Christianity and the division of England into Saxon and Viking-controlled territories. This battle ensured the survival of Anglo-Saxon England and laid the groundwork for its eventual unification under Alfred's successors. Number 6. The Siege of York, 866 AD. The Siege of York, 866 AD, marked the beginning of the Viking conquest of England. Led by the legendary Ivar the Boneless and Halfdan Ragnarsson, the great heathen army launched a surprise assault on the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Northumbria. At the time, Northumbria was weakened by internal strife, as rival kings Aella and Osberht fought for the throne. The Vikings took advantage of this instability, swiftly capturing York, the kingdom's capital, and establishing it as their stronghold. The Northumbrians attempted to retake the city in 867 AD, uniting their forces in a desperate bid to drive out the Norse invaders. However, the Vikings had fortified York, and when the Anglo-Saxons attacked, they were drawn into the narrow streets, where they were ambushed and slaughtered. Osberht and Aella were both killed, with Aella reportedly suffering the gruesome Blood Eagle execution. With York secured, the Vikings established Jorvik, a major Norse stronghold that would remain under Viking rule for decades. Number 5. The Battle of Hafrsfjord, 872 AD. The Battle of Hafrsfjord, 872 AD, was a defining moment in Norwegian history, as it led to the unification of Norway under Harald Fairhair. Before the battle, Norway was divided into numerous small, warring kingdoms, each ruled by local chieftains. Harald, determined to bring the region under his rule, waged a series of wars against rival leaders. The final and most decisive clash took place in Hafrsfjord, where Harald's fleet engaged in a brutal naval battle against a coalition of resisting chieftains. After intense fighting, Harald emerged victorious, crushing his enemies and securing his place as the first king of a unified Norway. Many of the defeated warriors fled, some settling in Iceland, the Faroe Islands, and beyond, spreading Norse culture across the North Atlantic. This battle not only cemented Harald's reign but also shaped the course of Viking expansion, as exiled warriors sought new lands to conquer. Number 4. The Battle of Stiklestad, 1030 AD. The Battle of Stiklestad, 1030 AD, was a pivotal conflict in Norwegian history, marking the struggle between pagan traditions and the growing influence of Christianity. The battle was fought between the forces of King Olaf II Haraldsson, who sought to reclaim his throne and spread Christianity, and a coalition of Norwegian nobles who opposed his rule. Olaf, once a powerful king, had been exiled but returned with an army to challenge his rivals. However, his forces were heavily outnumbered when they clashed at Stiklestad, leading to a fierce and bloody battle. Olaf was killed in combat, but his death had unintended consequences. He was later canonized as Saint Olaf, and his martyrdom played a crucial role in the Christianization of Norway. His legacy turned the tide in favor of Christianity, as many saw his death as divine proof of his righteousness. The battle, though a defeat for Olaf, ultimately helped solidify Christian rule in Scandinavia, changing the religious landscape of the region forever. Number 3. The Battle of Clontarf, 1014 AD. The Battle of Clontarf, 1014 AD, was a defining moment in Irish and Viking history, fought between the forces of the Irish High King Brian Boru and a coalition of Viking warriors and their Irish allies. For years, the Vikings had established strongholds in Ireland, particularly in Dublin, and had both fought against and allied with various Irish factions. Brian Boru, who sought to unite Ireland under his rule, marched against the Viking-led forces at Clontarf on Good Friday, April 23, 1014. The battle was a brutal and bloody affair, with thousands of warriors clashing on the banks of the river Tulka. By the end of the day, Brian Boru's army emerged victorious, effectively ending large-scale Viking power in Ireland. However, the victory came at a heavy cost. Brian Boru, though too old to fight, was assassinated in his tent by fleeing Viking warriors. Despite his death, the battle weakened Viking influence in Ireland and secured Brian's legacy as one of the greatest Irish rulers. The Viking presence in Ireland never fully disappeared, but their political power was permanently shattered, marking the beginning of a new era for the island. Number 2. The Battle of Stamford Bridge, 1066 AD. The Battle of Stamford Bridge, 1066 AD, was a dramatic turning point in Viking history, marking the end of the Viking Age. The battle took place on September 25, 1066, when the Norwegian king Harald Hardrada, one of the most feared Viking warriors, invaded England with the support of Tostig Godwinson, the exiled brother of the English king, Harold Godwinson. After securing a victory at Fulford, the Norsemen were caught off guard when Harold Godwinson's English army launched a surprise attack at Stamford Bridge. Many Vikings, unarmored and unprepared, were overwhelmed by the swift and deadly assault. Despite their legendary reputation, the Viking forces were annihilated in the battle. Harold Hardrada was struck down by an arrow to the throat, and Tostig was also killed. Of the 300 Viking ships that had arrived, only 24 were needed to carry the survivors back home. This defeat marked the end of Viking invasions in England, but it left Harold Godwinson's forces exhausted. Just 3 weeks later, they faced William the Conqueror at the Battle of Hastings, changing English history forever. Number 1. The Great Heathen Army's Invasion of England, 865–878 AD. The Great Heathen Army's Invasion of England, 865–878 AD, was one of the most significant Viking campaigns in history, as it marked the beginning of a large-scale, coordinated effort to conquer the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Led by a group of legendary Viking chieftains, including Ivar the Boneless, Halfdan Ragnarsson, and Ubbi Ragnarsson, the Great Heathen Army invaded England with the intent to establish Viking dominance. Over the course of several years, they systematically devastated the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, starting with East Anglia, before proceeding to Northumbria and Mercia, and leaving destruction in their wake. The Vikings' brutal tactics and their overwhelming numbers struck fear into the hearts of the Saxons. However, despite early success, the Viking forces encountered fierce resistance from King Alfred the Great of Wessex. In 878 AD, after a series of bloody skirmishes and the capture of the city of Chippenham, Alfred managed to rally his forces, leading a decisive victory at the Battle of Edington. This battle broke the Viking advance and forced the invaders into a treaty, where they agreed to settle in the Danelaw, a large portion of northern and eastern England. The Great Heathen Army's invasion significantly altered the political landscape of England and had lasting effects on the Saxon and Viking cultures. And there you have it, the top 10 most epic Viking wars. These battles defined an era of conquest, heroism, and bloodshed. Which Viking battle do you think was the most legendary? Comment below and let us know.